In this video, we're going to start locking down our VPS that we spun up in the last video. So while everything is updated and all the security updates are applied, there's still a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that our system is in a good, secure state. The first thing to do is to make sure that there is another user besides root. And that's just because running on root isn't really the best idea in the world. So it's just because root has everything, access to everything. It can do everything, and if you do accidentally just destroy your entire system very easily, which is suboptimal. It's not usually the thing that you want to do when you're running on this. So generally speaking, the best practice is have another user that even could potentially use this tool called sudo to elevate itself to root. But even that sudo command is a nice little blocker because it lets you know, hey, you have to, you're purposely doing something like that. So that's the reason why we're going to create another user for ourselves, and then we'll give it admin access. And that's much better than just root access like we have right now. So the way we're going to do this is a command called add user. And in fact, there are two user creation commands that we can use. There's user add. So if I do man, by the way, if you're not familiar with Linux, man opens the manual. So man user add, for example, tells us, hey, this user add, create or add a new user. If you're looking online for different ways of doing this, you probably will find documentation for this because this has been around forever. However, you'll notice here on Debian-based systems, which Ubuntu is based on Debian, we should generally use the user add command. And that's because it's just a little bit nicer. It asks us for some things, and it basically does the stuff that we really want to do. This, however, is great for shell scripting. So if you ever sort of get into that side of things and you want to start automating a bunch of this stuff, you're going to start learning this. But we're not going to use this one here. We're going to go into add user. So looking at the manual page for this, there's a lot of stuff here that we don't really necessarily need. In fact, we're really not going to need to do much with the command besides just give it the name of the command. But the way we can read this is add user. Everything in these brackets is optional. So we don't really need to tell it where the home directory is or what shell it's going to use. But this user here, the username, not optional whatsoever. We need to give them that. So we're going to do add user and then the name of our user. Well, I'm going to just give myself, I'm not going to use the name admin. I want individuals. So I'm going to just say, well, my name is Brooks. So I'm going to say Brooks. Okay, so adding user Brooks, it creates a group for this user, and then it adds, it creates my user, and then adds me with the group. It creates a home directory for me, and then it populates that home directory from this skeleton file, which is a place. If you want to be able to customize what people get in their home directories, you can go in there and set that up, but we don't need to worry about that. Next, it asks for a password. Okay, so let's give it a password. I'm going to give it a temporary password. And that just if it's like a real account that I'm creating for a real system, I would definitely give it something much more secure, probably something that I would store inside of LastPass or something like that. All right, now I can give it the full information that I want to give it. So we'll just give it Brooks. I don't really need to give it any of this information, really. Sure, yeah, this is all correct. And there it goes. Now, if you're ever curious about where this information went, it went into something called the password file, which ironically does not store the passwords. That is reserved for the shadowers file. And the password file used to store passwords a way long time ago before they all got hashed and were stored in a much, much better way. Now the passwords file is really just a place to store the, what would it be? The information about a user. But we're just still calling it password behind the scenes. So if I want to see this information that I just created for this user, what I can do is I can cat / etc passwd. I'm going to pipe to grep, get my username, and here's this line that got created. So we can see here's my user account, here's where that password would have been, user ID, group ID, full name, home directory, and then the shell that this user is using. Okay, awesome. Now, let's say I want to switch over to this user. Yes, we're gonna switch user. I'm gonna use a dash so it gets like all the environment of this user and not just kind of sort of switching over. This is like a full switch over to user Brooks. Now I don't have to put in a user, I don't have to put in a kind of like password for this because I'm root. And this is the reason why you don't want to be root very often, because root can just do whatever it wants and it can just ignore all the rules of everybody else pretty much. Okay, so here I am as my user. And if we take a look at my working directory, I'm in my home directory here. So now I want to make sure that I have admin access. So sudo is the way to sort of get that admin access. And the way you use that is sudo and then just whatever command you want to do. So I want to ls just to like list out the files. I know ls doesn't normally need sudo access, but I'm going to use this command just to check to see if I can do that. So it asks me for my password. Oh, I'm not in a sudoers file. This incident will be reported. Well, I'm glad that I'm the person in control of this, because otherwise I'd probably be in trouble, right? No. It's basically a little email gets sent to the root user who can go see like, hey, this user attempted to use sudo. You should maybe go have a little chat with them. It does mean that if you're working with somebody else, the admins can actually see that you tried to do something like that. But it's our system. We don't really care. So I am not in a sudoers file, so therefore I can't actually access this. So there's a couple different ways to give me access. As root, so either way requires root, I can edit the sudoers file directly, which is definitely a way, it's a choice, or we can give access to the sudo group. So let's actually take a look at what groups exist. So I think we can just do groups, and I need to man this. I always forget like what the option are. I don't want to say I want a list of all the groups. Oh, this doesn't give me the options for every group. Print group memberships for each username, or if no username for the current process. I happen to know that the group that I want is named sudo. So if I do groups, I can see that I'm in the root group here. Do groups, Brooks. Brooks is in the Brooks group. Okay, that makes sense. I want to do I don't want to do like this group add, like I certainly could. What I really want to do is this mod user. So if we man mod user, user mod. Yeah, user mod. What I want to do here is I'm going to do an append and this groups, so I can append a group to this user. And I just happen to know that the group that I want to do is sudo, and I got this from the DigitalOcean documentation, sort of like reading through, hey, like just what do I want to do? And a lot of times in systems administration, we just sort of end up memorizing some of these things. And then that's just sort of like how we end up doing stuff until suddenly it stops working. Then we have to go figure out, hey, new version, new system. How does it work here? Okay, so we're going to do user mod -a capital G sudo and then Brooks. I do that. Okay, great. Now I want to switch back over to my Brooks account and do that sudo test again. So we're going to do su Brooks. I'm going to do, hey, look at this. To run a command as administrator, use sudo. Okay. So I've now been given access to this according to this. Let's test it out. So sudo ls, ask me for my password. And hey, it didn't tell me that I'm being reported for attempting to sudo something. It now, yeah, it didn't really work, but that's because all the files here are hidden. Let's try that again. So sudo ls-l. Well, al to show everything. Notice this time I don't need a password for this. That's because sudo memorizes that it's me. I've done this. There is a configuration file to be able to set what this is. The default is pretty good. It's something like 5 minutes or so between if you've like idle and you don't do anything for 5 minutes, then it's going to require you to use the password again. And that's just to prevent you from getting really upset that you have to constantly add in your password, but also at the same time, make you add in the password if you've been away from the computer for a little bit of time. Try to prevent somebody else from sliding on in and becoming root as you. Okay, so that's great. We now have our user, but how do we log in as this user? Well, certainly I can create another connection to my Windows subsystem for Linux here, and then SSH in as this user. I might be able to do that, but I don't know if that's like the best idea. Let's try it. So if I do SSH Brooks at, let's go find that IP address again. Permission denied, public key. So what this is telling me is that password, like username and password SSH has been turned off. I can't actually connect in, even though this account has username and password. I just can't do it. I have to connect in using an SSH key. So how do I do that? I am going to copy the SSH key over. Well, we already have the one that I really want over here in root. So I'm going to just exit. Well, before I exit out, we need to prepare some stuff. So we can see I don't have an SSH directory, so I need to create one. So victor.ssh. Great, perfect. That's what I need right now. We're going to exit out of this. I'm going to cd into .ssh as root, and we're going to see that there's this authorized keys here. If we take a look at this file, so cat authorized keys, this is that public key that we set up in DigitalOcean was copied into here. So this is basically telling this system here for this account, this key is authorized to SSH in to the, for this user into the system. Okay, well, what I really want to do is copy this authorized key folder into the other account. So we're going to do a copy authorized keys, and we're going to go to /home. So the home directory starts with /home, and then brooks.ssh. And then I always, like when I'm copying something into a directory, I always like to have just a trailing slash at the end. It's like generally not necessary, but this is like basically my paranoid self. What if, for example, something doesn't exist or whatever? I don't want to create a .ssh file or folder there in the case that this doesn't exist. Also notice that I was using tab autocomplete. So in order to like verify that things actually are there. If suddenly tab autocomplete stopped working, then stop whatever you're doing. Something is wrong. Don't just like manually start going in because you just like, better than the system. You don't. All right. So I've copied that over. Let's, I still as root need to head over there now to make some changes because As we're going to see, I still can't use this yet as myself. So we're going to cd into /home Brooks. It's going to come here to begin with. So if I look at everything, here's this .ssh. It is owned by me, so I'm fine. But this authorized key file is actually owned by root, which is not fine. This file must be owned by the user because if we take a look at the permissions here on the left, this first triplet is read, write, execute. Well, this is by the user. And then the second triplet is going to be the group. And then the third is going to be just anyone at all. And we can see that only the user, root, has read and write access. Well, I'm not root, I'm user Brooks, so I can't actually read this file. So that's not going to be good. So we need to change that, but because it's owned by root, I can't modify this unless I'm the owner. So I'm going to do a, let's see, change own. And I don't need to do anything recursive or anything like this. I'm just going to do chown. I give it what I want it to be. So I want this to be Brooks, colon Brooks. So become user Brooks, group Brooks, and then authorized keys, hit return, no feedback, which generally means it worked. Can check this again. And now authorized keys is owned by me. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and switch users back to myself. I'm going to cd into .ssh, and I can see this. So if I want to, I can cat authorized host myself, and everything is looking great. However, there is a problem here. This .ssh folder is a little bit too permissive. When you first start creating like directories, there's some default permissions that are set, and there are ways of changing that, but for the most part, those defaults are perfectly fine. However, .ssh is a special folder, and it really needs to be locked down because you really don't want just anybody to be able to reach in there and read your authorized keys and maybe set that up for a different user. And if we take a look, these permissions are myself, I can read, write, and execute this folder. Execute is like basically just go into the folder. So I can go into the folder, but anybody in my group can go in. Okay, that's still okay. Literally any user on the system can also go in and do that. That's a little bit more shady. So what I want to do is lock this down to me and only me. So we're going to do a chown here, but because I own this, I can do it myself. I don't need root to do this. I'm going to chown 700. So now where does this 700 come from? This comes from binary. So it's a triplet, right? Which means we're doing, we have 3 things to set. So I want this to be 1 for the read, 1 for the write, and 1 for the execute. Well, if we remember our binary, in binary, anything can only be like 0 or 1, but everything is represented as like 2s, right? So the farthest to the right is 1, and that's, well, just 1. The next one over is 2, and then the one after that is 4. So 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 4 is 7. That's where this 7 comes from. And then 0, 0 will just be these dashes that we see elsewhere here. So I'm going to chown 700.ssh. Changing ownership is not permitted. Wait, can I not do that? Wait, not chown, chmod, sorry. Wrong command. Chown is changing ownership. I want to chmod, change modification. And this command is for updating the permissions of something. So do that, and there we go. We got no feedback. If I do another LL, we see here, now I have a read write execute access to .ssh and nobody else has anything. Locked down to just me. So let's go ahead and test to make sure that I can still get in here. Another of the good tip is don't delete, don't like exit out completely when SSHing in to then go back in again, because if you do something to the system and like make it so you can't SSH in, for example, but you still have a window in, then you're fine. You can still fix your mistake and get back in. If you, however, exit out and you lose all your connections in, then you're kind of screwed. And then that's where you have to go into like the recovery mode, and that's a pain, and we're not going to cover that in this tutorial series. All right, so we're going to try to SSH in again. We got permission denied. Oh, I think I need to tell it to use the specific ID. So for some reason, it's a new window, and then my SSH, my key is not like being told by SSH to like constantly be added in. Well, there is a way to just say, hey, SSH, use a specific key for me, and then I'll just provide the passphrase. And that way, in the case that it's, you know, the agent, the SSH agent isn't working for some reason, hey, here we go. So I'm gonna just say, use this key. So we're gonna go into my home directory, .ssh, that ID, what is it, ed tutorial. Just use this identity file. It's gonna ask me for the passphrase. I'm going to paste that in, and I'm able to SSH in as myself now. So here I am. I'm able to now, I've created an account. We're able to SSH in as myself and not root. And if I want to become root for some reason, I can still do sudo su dash, put in my password, and now I'm root. So that is the first step of our locking down the system, creating an account for us to be able to connect into and just do all the stuff we really need to do, and only switch to root if we absolutely have to. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.